So Connecticut's Notable Trees Project is sponsored by Connecticut Botanical Society and the Connecticut College Arboretum. We are technically a committee in the Botanical Society, and Connecticut College hosts our website and houses our paper files, our old stuff. So I have to mention our sponsors. And what we do is basically document notable trees in Connecticut. A pretty simple take on that. And I'll talk about what makes a tree notable in a little bit. I just want to mention that our project is a 100% volunteer effort. We have no budgets or anything like that. We all do this because we're passionate about trees and big trees in Connecticut. Our database has over 4,600 individual tree records, which is a very large collection. And within that database, we've documented almost 500 different kinds of trees growing in Connecticut. One thing interesting about that is we probably have fewer than 100 native species. So what we see are trees from, other parts of the world, other temperate areas, mostly Asia and Europe, that grow here as ornamentals, as specimens, etc. And as mentioned, we have a website. You don't have to remember this, but if you Google Connecticut's notable trees, we should be the first hit. And on our website, we have, last time I ran a query, over 7,000 photographs of trees in Connecticut. All right, any questions? So we're using the word notable, and the question is, what makes a tree notable? Typically, it's simply their size. It could be a notable tree because of its size would be one of the largest of its species in the state. And some species don't get very large. So for instance, a dogwood tree, the largest dogwood tree in the state is much smaller than the average size oak tree. But if it's the largest, it's a champion, and we document that. And the other notable criterion is if a tree has a documented connection to history in our state. But by far, the vast majority of the trees in our database are in there because of their size. Questions? Okay. We have almost 15 volunteers in our project. And of course, I have to give them a big thanks here. And probably about 6 of us are very active. And that is measuring trees, taking photographs pretty much every week of the year. And before we go any further, I just want to mention Ed Richardson. Ed passed 5 years ago, but Ed was a volunteer on this project for decades. And of those, over 4,000 trees in the database, he found and measured the vast majority of those champions, national champions, et cetera. So without Ed's work, we would be literally a fraction of what we are today. So a quick project history. Our project was established in 1983 with a small group of people from the Connecticut Botanical Society. Glenn Dreyer was one of those. Glenn and I are co-chairs of this project, and Glenn is still involved. So what they did at the time was they came up with their own list of big trees, of champion trees, what they knew about. And this was, days before the internet. They took that list and wrote letters and included it to various organizations throughout the state, conservation organizations, land trusts, town conservation commissions, et cetera. And slowly, as a result, made more additions to their list, to that database. The big break came a couple years later when they found a national champion sugar maple, and that was in Norwich. And by national champion, that means it's the largest of its species in the country. So they found the largest sugar maple in the United States. And of course, I jumped ahead of myself. Of course, that made the newspapers, of course, the Current, but also the New York Times. And probably the most important thing about that was Ed Richardson saw the article and got involved with the project as a result. Glenn Dreyer published a book in 1989 and did a couple more editions. Connecticut's Notable Trees, same name as the project. That book is in most libraries in the state, and probably in Danbury Library as well. And then, my involvement came in 2005, 2006 with the website and database. So everything we do is live on our website. Before I jumped in, I should have asked any questions on the history. Okay. And here is that national champion sugar maple in Norwich. And you could see just what an enormous trunk on that tree. Probably about 7 feet in diameter. Glenn Dreyer is the fellow on the right there with the sunglasses. And this tree is not alive anymore. So before this project took hold in the 80s, there was a book that was published in 1934 by the Daughters of the American Revolution. There's a copy of it right here. This was a pretty simple book, and it had listed about 100 trees, included little write-ups and photographs. Most of these trees in it had connections to the American Revolution, which kind of makes sense if the Daughters of the American Revolution were interested in publishing it. And at the time it was published, probably a good portion of these trees weren't alive, but for the ones that were, photographs were included. So this kind of formed a basis for the project. And as I mentioned earlier, Glenn Dreyer published a book in 1989. A very simple book, but it had a lot of great photographs of some big trees, a lot of tables and charts, listing the sizes of the trees and the locations. And of course, this was for the internet, so this was pretty good. All right, do we have any questions? Okay, and if this was an in-person presentation, I would ask if anybody knows what tree this is, but I'll save that. This is our charter oak. It was a white oak growing in Hartford, and it's steeped in Connecticut history. As you may know, that the charter was hidden in it after a dubious lights out event at a meeting. So this was probably, you can say our first notable tree. And again, it's a white oak, and as a result, our state tree is the white oak species. And you can see there was a person in this photograph to the left. You could kind of make out the size, the enormous size of that trunk. Unfortunately, this tree came down in a tropical storm in 1856. This was a big deal in Hartford. People came from all over the city to see this. Church bells tolled. Samuel Colt sent his band there to play funeral dirges. People took mementos. And we know that furniture and other relics were made from this, and some of those are in our state capitol. Today, there's a little monument to where this tree was on Charter Oak Place, I believe, in Hartford. Any questions about the charter oak? And today we have one remaining first generation charter oak that's in Bushnell Park in Hartford, right across the street from the DEEP. We knew of others, and as far as we know, this is the last remaining one. So this tree, is about 150 years old at this point, nowhere near as large as the charter oak was, which, was probably several hundred years old. But this tree is healthy. It produces acorns, and we know people grow charter oak grandchildren from these acorns pretty much every year. And continue on with historic trees. In 1902, there was a state constitutional convention in Hartford, and a delegate from each town went to the convention, and they were given a gift of a pin oak seedling when they left. And these pin oak seedlings came from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And what we get from this is a historic set of trees. The delegates took these little seedlings back to their towns. They planted them either at their house or the town hall or a school or a church. And we have records of most all of these, not all of them. And it gives us a nice data set of pin oaks that are both interest scientifically and historically. Unfortunately for Danbury, we don't have any record of what happened to that delegate's tree. It's one of the few towns or cities we don't have a record for. And just a couple pictures here. Hartford's 1902 pin oak is in front of the State Library. And you can see it's maybe 3-4 feet in diameter. At this point, over 120 years old. On the right is Glastonbury's, and that one's slightly bigger at Hubbard Green. And I would say almost half of these trees are still alive and documented. We have them all listed on our website if you're interested in any nearby Danbury. Any questions on the 1902 pin oaks? Okay. So we just touched on historic trees. There are others, but those are the big sets. Most of the trees in our database, like I mentioned, are noted for their size. And the largest of each kind of tree or species we call the champion. And the question is always asked, well, what do you mean by largest, right? Is it the tallest? Is it the biggest trunk? What is it? And the answer is it's a point system. And this point system is not anything we made up. This was developed by American forests over 60 years ago. It's used throughout the country. And if I didn't say it earlier, every state in the country has a program similar to ours. And there is a national program as well. And that's how we know trees are national champions. So this point system takes in 3 factors. The first is the height of the tree in feet. Second is the trunk circumference in inches. And the last one is 1/4 of the average crown spread in feet. And by crown spread, we just mean by how far the branches spread out. So we take those 3 numbers and add them together to get total points. This can get kind of complicated, but that's the simple take on it. Do I have any questions on the points? Okay. So just a quick rundown. This is the Pinchot sycamore that was on our initial slide, the one that's on the cover of Glenn Dreyer's book. We measured this in 2017 last, and what we got was a height of 99 feet, the circumference of that trunk, 340 inches, which is pushing 10 feet in diameter. And we measured the widest spread at 145 feet, and then perpendicular to that at 136 feet. That gave us an average spread of 141. We divide that by 4, and we get 35. So we add those 3 numbers in yellow, and we get total points of 474. And just as a reference, if a tree in Connecticut was 300 points and you walk next to that, you would probably say, wow, that is one big tree. We get to a tree of 400 points, you would be even more impressed. It would be an absolute monster. We don't have a lot of trees over 400 points. And the Pinchot sycamore is pushing 500 points. So just an incredibly large tree. This is one of the largest sycamores in the country. And actually for the East Coast, this is, an extremely large tree. When we talk about some of the Western trees, though, it's not necessarily the case. The redwoods, the giant sequoias, the Douglas firs that grow in the Pacific Northwest can get over 1,000 points. Those trees can be over 300 feet tall. So for the East Coast, this is a monster, but there are bigger trees on the West Coast. Any questions about tree size or the Pinchot
Yes.
sycamore?
Yes, there's a
Okay.
question on the chat. Brittany
Oh,
would like to know how old is the Pinchot sycamore?
yeah, great question. Age always comes up. The answer is we don't know. Um, it it's been estimated to be over 400 years old. Um, don't have any so it was probably here. Could have been here before the Europeans settled. So we don't really know. If we don't have records of a tree being planted, the only other way to tell is by core samples. And what that is with a special instrument, you could drill into the tree and pull a little core sample out. And I'm talking about like a 1/4 inch diameter and literally count those rings. And that works, but in the case of really old trees like this, it's probable that the center is hollowed out. So we wouldn't know because we wouldn't get the full depth. I believe Glenn Dreyer kind of extrapolated some measurements he took from the 80s and then in the 2000s, and estimated over 400 years old. But that's just a guess as well, because growth rates can change over time. So without counting the rings or having a record of it being planted, the answer is we don't know. But it's safe to say several hundred years old, just based on the size of it. And on that note, I'll mention something, a tree I took a look at this weekend. That's our state champion black walnut in Scotland, Connecticut. That tree is not quite this big, but it's about 6 feet in diameter. And we do have a record of when that was planted. And I can't remember the year. I believe it's 17 something, but it was in a young woman's diary who lived at that house. So occasionally we come across interesting pieces of data like that. But for most of the big trees like this, we just don't know how old they are. So when measuring, the question always comes up, well, how do you measure the height? And we don't have to climb the tree. We use a little bit of technology to do that. I have a laser rangefinder that makes it really easy. I just kind of point it at the top of the tree and press a button, and it tells me how tall it is. But most of our volunteers have optical devices called clinometers, which are much less expensive. And basically, we just stand back from the tree at a known distance. And if you look at the example here, 100 feet is a good number. We look through our clinometer at the top of the tree, and it tells us a percentage, in this case, 85. And what that means is the height from horizontal to the top of the tree is 85% of that distance we're back. So that would be 85 feet. And then we do the same thing, shoot at the bottom of the tree, and get that additional 5 feet from horizontal to the bottom. So in this case, we have a 90-foot tree we measured. This is the simplest case. So many times we have trees in the forests that we can't see the top of, or the top, we don't know where it is in relation to the ground, so we don't know where 100 feet back is. So sometimes it's very difficult to measure the height. But for a tree growing in open area, this is exactly what we do. Any questions on measuring, including the trunk or spread? Okay. I'll just mention just something else too. A lot of what we do is measuring, but what I don't have a slide on is what we do is we ID the trees, right? We have to get the species. If we're going to declare a certain tree to be the largest of its species, we have to get that identification correct. So um, that is another big part of what we do, is knowing our trees. And it gets tough because we see trees from all over the world, from Asia, from Europe. Occasionally we see a tree we have never seen before. So as knowledgeable as we can become, sometimes we have to hit the books or internet to figure out what we have. So I'm going to move on to showing some pictures now.
Frank, we have a question. Do you recommend a specific tree ID book?
Um, there are a lot of good books out there. When I was starting out on this, I joined the project in 2005, and I knew very little. I got the Audubon um, guide, and I found that to be very helpful. Um, Peterson makes a great tree book. There's Sibley. Um, but what I've found recently um, was an app called Picture This, and it's for plants in general. And I found it to be very, very good. And I mentioned that because 5 years ago, that was not the case. I tried some plant identification apps, and they're probably around 25% correct. And what I'm seeing now is like over 90% of the time they've got the correct answer. So I would try that app, Picture This. Um, okay, we got to note that Picture This is used by Laura Lee. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, most of the time it gets it right. I've only found in very, very difficult cases it doesn't get it right. So it's a pretty good bet. All right. I will move on to some of our pictures of trees. Here is our co-champion white oak. And when you hear the term co-champion, it means there's another one within 5 points of this that is also a co-champion. This tree is in West Hartford on the former Yukon campus. The other co-champion is in, I believe, Sharon, Connecticut, out on a farm field. So white oak, again, is our state tree. And you can see the enormous trunk on this. This is probably about the size the charter oak was. You could see if you remember the pictures that had that really wide flare at the bottom and some burls and really gnarly looking. I also mentioned that every state in the country has a program like ours. The two people in this picture here are from Ohio, and they're involved with Ohio's Big Tree program. We're all on Facebook and Instagram together. So they were coming to Connecticut. They reached out to us and they wanted to know where some big trees were. So we pointed them to some. Here is our champion ginkgo. This is in Hartford at the Institute of Living. Ginkgo is an Asian tree. And this tree is probably around 150 years old. One of the largest in the country, if not the largest. And there's a close-up of the trunk. That's Ed Richardson in that picture. So you can see that trunk is, 6 feet plus in diameter. Here we have a European tree. This is a European beech, very similar to our Native American beech with the smooth bark. When they grow out in an open area, they'll kind of have this habit of multiple trunks. And they're pretty fast growers. This tree, maybe is 150 years old. And you can see it's got an enormous trunk on it. Forest-grown beeches typically will have a single trunk. Any questions on any of these trees?
Are any
Okay.
of these trees that are considered notable, are they protected at all from being cut down?
Yeah, great question. The answer is no, they're not. Other than, a public knowledge of the tree being, the largest of its kind in the state or part of our database, sometimes that pulls weight, but um, every once in a while we have a tree that's threatened, and no, there's no legal status. Um, but it being part of our database does hold weight. Sometimes, we reach out to local politicians, utility companies, et cetera, to let them know. And a lot of times we have good results, but not always. Thanks for that question. That is important. Um, just another really fascinating tree. This is a hybrid butternut, state champion. Um, this has a story. I think I'm running a little behind on time, so I'll kind of skip the stories or maybe save them to the end unless someone has a question right now. But I just shared this because I love the picture. Just got an enormous and interesting trunk. So, not all, as I mentioned, not all our champion trees are huge. This is our champion apple tree in Bloomfield. Um, this is about as big as apple trees get. It's probably one of the biggest ones in the country. This tree is still healthy despite its age and size. The last we knew, it was producing apples. That was last year. And moving down the smaller scale, this is our native redbud tree. Um, and that tree is only, maybe a foot and a half, 2 feet in diameter at the bottom there, that trunk. But it is our co-champion. Red buds are widely planted in the state because of their beautiful foliage in the early, or beautiful flowers in the early spring. And going even smaller is a variety of Japanese maple. This one is at Cedar Hill Cemetery, but it's a thread leaf, which means it's a purple thread leaf. It's got uh, the leaf is it's a variety where the leaf is kind of dissected and is normally purple. This is the fall foliage, just a spectacular photo by our volunteer Marty. And this is a small tree. It's a slow grower. It's got a kind of a contorted habit, so they don't get huge. Um, Maybe in another 500 years it'll be significantly larger, but this is probably how it's going to be for a while. Any questions on tree sizes? Okay, we got a question about mature trees and cemeteries, and the answer is yes. Um, Worcester Cemetery, I've got a slide on that later in the presentation, but cemeteries are great places to see notable trees. They're usually well cared for, and we also see a lot of different varieties being planted. So this is a fine example right here, and Cedar Hill Cemetery in general is probably the best cemetery in the state to view trees. John Kehoe was one of our volunteers, and he usually does a tree walk there at least once a year, and I believe he did it a week or two ago. So you missed this year, but check out the website. He'll be doing those again. So national champions, we presently have 8, which is pretty good for our state. We've got a small state, a relatively cold climate, so a lot of tree species simply won't grow here compared to, let's say, the southeastern United States or even the southwestern United States, where they have, hundreds of native species. We have fewer than 100. Um, But because of our volunteer effort, we've got 8 champions, and we probably have some more. It's a matter of a technicality at this point. But the National Tree Champion program is undergoing a renovation with new owners. So in another year, this number might be significantly larger as the database gets cleaned up. And I'll do a couple of national champions here. This is a national champion black oak in East Granby. Black oak is a native tree. This tree has been national champion since I think 1980, so it's a long-standing one. The tree is still fairly healthy. It's just at the end of a field, not too far from a road, across the street from houses. And you can see that gnarly trunk, and that trunk is larger than the trunk of the Pinchot sycamore. Here is the national champion Norway spruce. This is out in Salisbury. Norway spruce is not a native tree. It's native to Europe, but this is the largest in the country, and it's been championed for about 10 years now. Any questions on the national champion program before I move on? Okay. So Danbury, we got a couple slides on Danbury here. We presently have 11 notable trees in our database, but I have to say I think Danbury is underrepresented. And I'm not sure why. It could be because it's on the extreme western side of the state, and we don't have any volunteers really close by. Ed Richardson lived in Glastonbury. It was probably a tough trek for him. We don't have any state champions in Danbury. So maybe that's encouragement for the people listening. If you're in Danbury, to get around to check out some of those cemeteries, and any other public areas for anything interesting. And as far as contacting us goes, we have our email address on our website. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, and we get messages all the time. We do our best to attend to those, so we should be reachable. And I'll talk about a few of these Danbury trees. Worcester Cemetery, we have 3. The first is a weeping European beech, and this is a variety of the European beech that we saw earlier, and it's a variety that has weeping branches that will hang vertically straight down to the ground. This particular one, it looks like the Cemetery Association must cut it up about 6-8 feet or something, but normally the branches will go all the way to the ground, and when this is in foliage in the fall, it looks like just one. I mean, in the spring when the leaves come out through the fall, it looks like one just giant orb. You can't see the trunk and right to the ground. We have a pink weeping cherry, and you could see that all those burls there formed because this was a graft. Typically with these weeping cherries, we like to show photographs of them in bloom, and we don't have one of this tree in bloom. So if someone would like to go out there at the end of April into May to take pictures of those pink flowers with the weeping habit, we would love to have that on our website. And a really interesting tree at the cemetery is a white pine. This is our native white pine. Typically, white pines are single-trunked trees. And this one, as you can see, has many, many trunks. I'm not sure what happened with it, but it may have gotten damaged, very young. The growing tip may have been, chewed off. It may have been affected by a weevil or something, but it sprouted a bunch of leaders, and we got a very, very interesting tree as a result in the cemetery. I haven't been to Worcester Cemetery, but some of our volunteers have, so I'm not sure how exhaustively they've searched that cemetery, but there may be other notable trees in it as well. So from Matthew's book, the one that I showed early on, uh, we had one tree from Danbury, and that was nicknamed the Revolutionary Sycamore. And the book tells us that this was standing at the time of Danbury settlement in 1685. This was on Worcester Street. We have some more recent photographs of it. These photographs are from 2010 and 2011. You could see the size of that trunk. This was about 400 points. I don't remember the exact number. I think just short of 400 points. Um, Unfortunately, this tree came down in 2014. It was cut down by the power company. You could see the proximity to the high voltage lines there. Um, there was an effort to save this tree. And we were involved in that, but unfortunately, it did not work out. And they cut this historic and healthy tree down. So that was a sad story, but it does happen. Any questions? Okay, so as I mentioned, I thought Danbury was a little underrepresented, but we've got trees in every town in the state in our database, and I thought I would just share a couple of ones that are nearby. Um, Marty, one of our volunteers, asked me to share this one. This is a white oak. It's not anywhere near champion sized, and it's in a backyard, so it's not accessible, but he asked me to share it because of its great branching habit, I think. You can see these open grown white oaks will spread their branches, very, very wide, wider than than the height. This makes me think of the Granby Dewey oak, if anyone's familiar with that. That's in Granby. I think it's on Day Road, right? Literally on the side of the road. If you have a chance to see that, it's very, very easy to visit, very accessible. Nearby in Bethel, we've got a couple sycamores, some of the largest trees in the state. This one is 412 points, and this is near the corner of routes 302 and 53. You could see it's in a very developed area. It looks like you could literally park right next to it. There's also another large sycamore over 400 points on Walnut Hill Road in Bethel. This is in somebody's front yard, but very, very easy to view from the road. Again, an enormous, absolutely enormous trunk. And also nearby, this is not the greatest picture. I realize we don't have a great picture. This is our state champion Norway maple. This is in Ridgefield. I believe it's called the Ridgefield Artists Guild on Halpin Lane. And this is one of the largest Norway maples in the country. Potential national champion, but we're not sure if the program is going to include Norway maples. Any questions? All right. So I always get asked at these presentations, have we found all the big trees in Connecticut? And, as small as our state is, as densely populated as it is, and we don't really have any wilderness areas to speak of. You'd think we may have found them all, but the answer is no. We're still finding big trees and champion trees. Got a couple examples here. These were found in the last 10 years or so. This is an enormous weeping willow in Suffield. This here is the largest trunked tree in the state. It's over 10 feet in diameter. And this was just literally in somebody's backyard. And we simply did not know about it until one of our volunteers, Marty, drove down the street and saw something in the backyard and stopped. About that same time, we were notified of a huge sycamore on the banks of the Connecticut River. This is kind of inaccessible. It was probably known to boaters and to fishermen, but we didn't know about it until we got that message. We went out there. And at the time, it was the second largest in the state, after the Pinchot sycamore, second largest sycamore, that is. So you can see again, how big that trunk is. And this is literally on the bank of the Connecticut River. I checked on it last year. It's still standing, but at some point in the floods, the bank is probably going to give way. We saw the Norway maple. This is also a recent find, and it's impressive. It was a recent find for a national champion. So yes, we're still finding new champions. They're not always huge like this. This is pretty uncommon. But the new champions we're more likely to find are new species, interesting trees. Uh, Here is a orange bark Stewartia in South Windsor. This is the only known orange bark Stewartia in the state, so it is the champion. This tree's got a little story here where it was slated to, the whole area was slated to get cut down, and luckily it was spared. We have a yucca. This is, I believe, a beaked yucca. I forget the scientific name. We got an email, maybe just probably 5 years ago or less, of a palm tree in Norwalk. And we got the pictures. We knew it wasn't a palm tree. We knew it was a yucca, but yuccas don't grow. Well, large yuccas like this don't grow here. So we had no idea what it might be. I went down, I measured it. I took a whole bunch of photographs and started talking to some people on Facebook, tree enthusiasts from the southwestern United States, and we were able to identify it. This is a tree native to the southwestern United States. And, you take away the snow here and, you might say it could look like it's in its native habitat in New Mexico or something. But this was very, very carefully planted by someone who knew what they were doing from, I think it was the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Planted it in a big sandbank and south facing next to a masonry wall to ensure its survival. This is one of my favorites. This is a monkey puzzle. This is a tree native to South America, and it's technically too cold for it to grow here. This one is growing in Mystic on a little island in the middle of some roads. So very exposed, they're very vulnerable, but it's been in the ground for over 20 years and is very healthy. It produced cones last year, I believe. And since, this is our champion, and since we found this one, there's another one in Greenwich, I believe at the Pinetum. And again, this normally it'd be considered too cold to grow in Connecticut, but this one has hung on. This is a more recent find, I think maybe 2 years ago. This is a red-tipped Photinia. It's an Asian tree, maybe large shrub, if you will. Again, too cold to grow in Connecticut by the books, but this one is growing. Long Island Sound is literally across the street there, so a very mild climate, tempered by the salt water, kind of buffered from extreme cold events. And, I mentioned palm trees earlier. The question comes up, are there any palm trees in Connecticut? The answer is yes. We know of a couple. This is the largest. This is a windmill palm, native to Asia, but it's probably the most cold hardy palm. There are records of it growing in Virginia. Here it is in Woodbury, way outside of its hardiness zone. And this is cared for by a guy, a professor from the University of Bridgeport, who is a plant enthusiast. He wraps this in insulation every winter. And as you can see, he planted it, right next to the house, south facing exposure. So, protected from north winds, about as favorable of a climate as you can get. And this has been in the ground for 15 years, so it's staying. We also have a couple cabbage palmettos planted by the same professor down in Bridgeport at the University of Bridgeport. They're about half that size though. And we occasionally get notices or emails of other palm trees in the state. Cabbage palmettos mostly, usually shrub sized. Um, so we've got a bunch of others out there. We usually like to let them, you know, kind of grow several years at least. We don't want to enter in our database, only to have them die in the cold after a year or two, which does happen a lot. A lot of people attempt to plant palm trees or other species, and all it takes sometimes is one very cold winter snap, uh, cold snap in the winter to kill the plant. And I just saw a question. Our hardiness zones has recently changed. Um, yes, I forget the last time the USDA put out the hardiness map, but yeah, we're getting warmer. The southern part of the state along Long Island Sound is clearly in zone 7. The rest of the state is in zone 6, a little cooler. And I'm not even sure we have any more zone 5 in the state, perhaps in the northwest corner. But all these hardiness zones are kind of moving northward, with climate change. And as a result, we're seeing notable trees, like this palm tree and some others, able to hang on. Personally, I've noticed other trees native to kind of south of us, kind of germinating in the past 5 to 10 years, where prior to that they have not been. So yeah, there are changes, and we can probably expect to see more of that. Perhaps not good for our environment, but for individual trees, certainly interesting. And now my last slide is the web page. And as I mentioned, the easiest way to get there is just Google Connecticut's notable trees. You'll see this is the Pinchot sycamore that actually runs a slideshow. So you could just kind of watch our notable trees go across. But on the left side of the page, we've got a bunch of links where you could kind of filter. You could look at trees by town or by species or by historic trees, champion lists, etc. And I'm not sure if that's the left side. I'm not sure if I said left or right. And on the right side, we've got the latest news. And what that is that's a feed. Everything our group of volunteers does, whether it's, measure a tree, add a new tree, upload a photograph to the website, that ends up in our news feed. It also goes to Facebook as well, pictures and data. So it's, Facebook is a great way to kind of keep up with the latest, to include have it included in your feed, and a way to be interactive and reach out to us if need be. So